Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. I was recently able to attend the first motorcycle show of the season, and that was the Moto Modern Classics Bike Show. It was held on March 29th and 30th of 2025. Although the show itself took place indoors, the parking lot was also full of cool classic bikes that people chose to ride in on. To host the show, Moto cleared out the entire sales floor, and that is where the show bikes were featured. There's also an upper level that was filled with cool classic bikes as well. And so it was just a treat to get to walk around and see all of these beautiful motorcycles. A lot of them are very historically significant motorcycles. Additionally, I got to meet Dennis Martin, who's the owner of Moto. Unlike some shop owners, he seems like he genuinely enjoys motorcycles. And I love the fact that he hosts motorcycle shows like this for the motorcycling community. There were all sorts of motorcycles at the show, from classic race bikes to iconic two-strokes to turbo bikes, as well as classic European, American, and Japanese motorcycles. Let's take a look at what was at the show. Starting off with the two-strokes, in the late 60s and early 70s, Kawasaki really made a name for itself in the performance segment with their high-performance two-stroke machines. The bike pictured here is an early 70s KH400. It was a 400 three-cylinder two-stroke machine. Next up, we have what is arguably the best known two-stroke, and that is the Kawasaki 750 triple two-stroke. This was the straight line performance king of the early 70s, and this bike had a fearsome reputation as a wheelie machine and a widowmaker due to the massive power output that really overpowered the chassis and braking systems of the motorcycle. Next up, we have the Suzuki two-strokes. Suzuki also made a vast line of two-stroke motorcycles in the late 60s and the early 70s. Although they weren't quite as fast as the products from Kawasaki, they were generally a little bit more refined. This is a beautiful little GT250. It's a two-stroke, twin-cylinder design, and the castings on the head were designed to increase airflow over the head of the motorcycle for longevity of that engine. Moving from mild to wild here, we have probably the second most iconic two-stroke motorcycle, and that is the Suzuki RZ500 Gamma. Not only is this a Gamma, it is a limited edition Walter Wolf Racing Edition Gamma. The RZ500 Gammas were never imported to the United States, so all of the Gammas that you see in the United States are gray market bikes that were usually brought in through Canada. The Gamma features a liquid-cooled four-cylinder 500cc two-stroke. The next fearsome two-stroke we'll look at is the Gamma's competition from Yamaha, and that is the RZ500. The RZ500 was also a liquid-cooled four-cylinder two-stroke design, and like the Gamma, it was developed primarily for racing. Any RZ500 seen in the US is also a gray market bike. The tail section on the RZ500 is really cool with the quad exhaust pipes coming out the back. One Yamaha two-stroke that was imported to the US was the RZ350, and this is the little brother to the RZ500. This is a twin-cylinder, liquid-cooled two-stroke bike. The RZ350 is also a very quick bike, especially given its small displacement. Next up, I'm sure a lot of you thought Ducati 916 when you first saw this image. This bike is actually an Italian two-stroke motorcycle. It is produced by a company called Cagiva. This bike was also designed by Massimo Tamburini, who designed the 916. This bike is a 125cc liquid-cooled two-stroke motorcycle. Unlike the 916, this bike features an aluminum beam-type frame. Moving on from the two-stroke bikes, we have the crazy early 80s turbo bikes. There was such a cool collection of extremely low-mileage turbo motorcycles at the show. Starting off the turbo bikes is Kawasaki's fearsome 750 Turbo. By all accounts, this was the quickest of the turbo bikes. To my eye, it's also the most classically beautiful of the turbo bikes, and I love the way this one looks in the red and black. The next turbo bike we'll look at is the CX500 Turbo from Honda. Honda really went all out on the CX500 Turbo, and it had a host of features that were really advanced for the time, including the fuel injection, including the turbo. Honda's best turbo bike was the similar looking CX650 Turbo. Not only did this motorcycle have much more usable power than the CX500 Turbo, it also was a much simplified version of the motorcycle, and if you're going to get a Honda turbo, the CX650 is really the one to have. The next turbo bike we'll look at is Yamaha's funky-looking Seca 650 Turbo. This is also probably the simplest of the turbo bikes, and this is the only turbo bike that features carburetors instead of fuel injection for the fueling on the motorcycle. I would love to ride one of these Yamahas, and looking at the wind protection, it actually looks like this would be a fairly nice GT-style motorcycle. And that brings us to the rarest of the turbo bikes, and that is Suzuki's XN85. I love the styling on these. These are very reminiscent of the Katana motorcycle line. I have several friends who have owned these in the past. I would love to get to ride one just to experience it, but everybody I know who has ridden one of these says it's just a really nice bike to ride. Moving into the Japanese motorcycles, the first brand we'll take a look at is Honda, and this 1969 CB750 is one of the most well-known classic motorcycles. When this motorcycle came out, it really set the standard for refinement, for reliability, and for longevity in a big displacement motorcycle. Sitting nearby is a Cafe Racer CB750. I really love the clean execution of this bike. I usually don't like Cafe Racers, but this one was really, really well done. No classic bike show would be complete without a Honda CBX 1000 6-cylinder, and it was so cool to get to see this candy red beauty at the show. When seen from this angle, you can see that that 6-cylinder engine really dominates the styling on the CBX. Nearby, we had this Honda Nighthawk S. In the US, we got the 700cc version of this motorcycle, but elsewhere, this was a 750cc motorcycle. This bike had some really nice features. It had hydraulic actuators for the valves, and so that is a maintenance-free item on this bike, and this bike also featured shaft final drive. So this was really a low-maintenance, do-everything type of sporting motorcycle, and these are a hoot to ride. Moving on, this Honda is one that you rarely see in nice condition out on the road these days, and that is their Interceptor 1000. I have ridden one of these, and these are such a nice riding, comfortable, sporting motorcycle. I love that V4 power plant. The Interceptor was really overshadowed by the much more racy and beautifully styled VF1000R motorcycles from Honda. Just outside in the parking lot was this CB1100F. This one is beautiful with a lot of nice touches, including steel braided brake lines, Öhlins rear shocks, and a Kirker header. Moving on to Suzuki, there's this GS750E at the show, and it was a development of Suzuki's original GS750 when the designation changed from GS750 to GS750E in the US. That designated a 16-valve head for the GS750. In Europe, the 16-valve head was designated by the GSX designation. Here we have another iconic Suzuki motorcycle, and that is the GS1000S. This is a West Cooley replica bike. The West Cooley bikes had the front fairing on them, and then they had the two-tone paint schemes on them. This is the most valuable of the 8-valve GS1000 motorcycles. Next up is another iconic Suzuki motorcycle, and that is the Katana 1000. This bike debuted in the early 80s. It was heavily based on Suzuki's GS1000 and GS1100 motorcycles. However, it sported a very radical seating position and somewhat controversial styling. It's either a love it or hate it design. I have had one of these previously. The reason I sold mine was, as beautiful as it looked, it was really, really, really uncomfortable for me to ride. So I really didn't enjoy riding it as much as I do the other big GS motorcycles. Next up, we have this very nice looking GSXR 750. The body has been painted as a Kevin Swantz tribute bike, and this is a really neat one to see at the show. Out in the parking lot, it was very cool to see this classic Suzuki. This is a Madura 1200. It sports a 16-valve V4 engine, and this was Suzuki's answer to the V-Max and the V65 Magna and the Eliminator from Kawasaki. Moving on to the Kawasaki's at the show, there were several flavors of the KZ1000 there. This one is either a 1977 or 78 KZ1000, and it has a non-standard paint scheme. This is just a beautiful example of the KZ1000 A series. I love the clean styling on these bikes. Sitting next to it is a Kawasaki Z1 Classic. This is a 1980 model, and surprisingly, this bike features fuel injection. So that was very, very advanced for 1980. You can also see the chrome insert on the tank. That's kind of a cool feature. And styling-wise, this bike was a transitional model between the original KZ900 LTD styling and the 1981 Kawasaki LTD styling. The final KZ1000 we'll look at is the KZ1000R Eddie Lawson replica. This bike was styled very much like the GPZ models, but it does have some minor differences aside from the paint colors. The most obvious difference is the factory installed full Kirker 4-into-1 exhaust system. Moving on to the Yamahas. On the upper level, I found this beautiful 900 Seca. This was called the Vision 900 in Europe. This bike was somewhat unique among the early 80s superbikes in that it featured shaft final drive. And while this didn't really help performance, and neither did the 900cc displacement when compared with the 1100cc competition, it did help to make this bike a low-maintenance GT style of motorcycle. Although these bikes were not popular in the US, they were much more popular in Europe. The final Yamaha we'll look at is the legendary V-Max. This was the king of the mid-80s muscle cruisers. This is a first-generation bike. You can spot that right away by the single piston brake calipers on the front brakes. When this bike was introduced, it was the quarter-mile king. When you ride the V-Max, that big V4 is definitely the star of the show. Unlike the rest of the muscle cruisers, which really faded away very quickly, the Yamaha had a very long production run. Another very rare bike at the show was this Krauser MKM1000 BMW. This particular bike is a monoposto version or a single seat version. It also features the 4-valve per cylinder heads on it. Though it was based on BMW mechanicals, the Krauser had a completely new steel tube frame on it. It also had completely new bodywork, and it was a treat to get to see this one at the show. Another cool, funky looking bike at the show was this Norton John Player Special. This motorcycle was a road-going tribute bike to the 750cc John Player racers of the time. Another racy European motorcycle at the show was this beautiful Ducati 750. This one sports the number 16 of Paul Smart, who won the Imola 200 race in 1972. The next Ducati we'll look at here is Ducati's 750 GT in the candy orange and black color scheme. It features the iconic 90-degree V-twin that Ducati is really associated with. And looking at the ergonomics on this one looks more comfortable than a lot of the more racy Ducati motorcycles. Next up is what looks to be a 1990 Ducati 750 Sport Desmo. Looking at this motorcycle, we can clearly see the steel tube trellis type frame that Ducati was famous for, and they used this style of frame long after the Japanese manufacturers had all gone to the aluminum beam type frames. There was a Ducati 916 at the show, and this bike is probably the most iconic hardcore sport bike that's ever been produced. The styling was so advanced for the early 90s, and this bike still looks modern today. This bike is just a classically beautiful motorcycle design. The next Italian brand that we'll look at is MV Agusta. This is their 750 GT. This is one of their more pedestrian designs, and it's set up as a standard naked style motorcycle. You can still see that sand cast 750cc motor, and this more touring oriented MV Agusta actually featured shaft final drive. Another Italian racy looking motorcycle at the show was this red and silver MV Agusta. You can definitely see that sand cast MV Agusta engine in the frame. You can also see the upswept exhaust. I think those are just mechanical artwork. I could not find a picture of a similar bike on the internet. If anybody out there knows what this is, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. The final MV Agusta motorcycle that we'll look at is this MV Agusta F4. For those of you who don't know, this bike was also designed by Massimo Tamburini, and this is just another beautiful Italian motorcycle. All right, man, what a lot of fun. It was so great getting to see all of these classic motorcycles in one place. I want to thank Martin Moto for hosting this show. Although I'd love to be able to cover every classic motorcycle that was there, that's really beyond the scope of one video. As always, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, enjoy the ride.